Hey folks, Eshan here with another segment of All Wise Transformation. And the conversation continues with spiritual practice, self-care, and mental health. And today I have an awesome guest with me, Tracy Forest, who is uh, a co-founder director at Spirit Hollow in Vermont, who's a soul guide, a yoga teacher, and singer. And Tracy, welcome.
Welcome to me, and thank you for having me. So great to
Yeah,
share with you. Yeah, we've
yeah,
been together
yeah.
for like 20 years or what, maybe more.
Uh,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I want to say because I graduated from Southern Vermont to '05, I want to say.
Jeez, that's 20 years. Yeah, more. Yeah, since we knew each other. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Oh my God. I've been so excited to get this um meeting together. And so I
Yeah.
usually like to start off with what are you curious about, Tracy, these days? What stokes your curiosity?
Hmm. Okay, great way to dive in. I think what I'm most curious about as a human and as a soul-oriented being is um, what's happening in between the binaries. So, in a world where it's us versus them, and they're right and they're wrong, and there's this old dying patriarchy and this beautiful new kind of utopian world we're trying to dream into being, I'm really holding space for what's between that and listening for the emergent and listening for what's the earth want of us now? What are the dreams saying to us now? What's this kind of way between those binaries that maybe we don't even know? There's stuff like we feel like we know it's either this way or that way. It's black or white, it's blue or red. And I'm just like really curious about what's in the in-betweens. I don't know if you know Bayo Akamalaфe's work. You may, Nigerian, well-known spiritual intellectual, and he talks about the gods, the spirits of the fault lines. Like what's emerging through the cracks right now? It's the world's unknown. And so I'm kind of really curious about because I think we can all get really into, getting from here to there or being this way or that way, but not holding space for um the unexpected and the unknown. And I'm hopeful in about that and curious about that because we are in this place where a lot of things seem to be crumbling. As Francis Weller says, we're in the long dark now. And as Joanna Macy, the Earth Elder, would say, we're in the great unraveling. And we all know what that is for our own. It's about the earth and the environment, and it's about the political systems, and it's about all those things. And we're in that, and these ones and others would say that's a like we're in a descent. We're going into the underworld. And of course, underworld journeys are classic across the world. It from for thousands of years. It's in all the different mythologies that we have to kind of descend out of the normal or ordinary world in order to move into the darkness and have ourselves reshaped and look for the jewels in the darkness and have an initiatory experience. And so it could well be that as humans we're in a descent into the darkness, and let's hope that we find something in the darkness that is going to surprise us or be shake us up or let us be letting go of the old identities and rigid ways that we have all been thinking, and myself certainly included. Like, what am I not seeing here? How can I hold space and curiosity for it's exciting to me because sometimes I can get really, as many of us probably, overwhelmed and sad about the days we're in, particularly as a mother of two young adults and somebody who cares really deeply about the future ones, knowing I'm an ancestor in the making. What
Yeah.
actions I do are having an effect on whatever's happening later, and I can get into the despair place. Um, and yet I also feel like there is something emerging,
Yeah.
but we don't know what it is yet. And so I'm most curious to stay listening as deeply as I can to the dream time, to earth,
Mm.
to the spirits of the fault lines, and not think I know everything. And really be open to what is coming. And if that answers your question in some way.
Yeah, no, I love this idea of in between because I am trying to practice duality in the
Hmm.
sense that it doesn't necessarily have to be this or that. And
Yeah.
so how do I broaden my perception of where I am and how I'm moving and how I'm interacting with individual? Because I like that in between because we're multifaceted and sometimes we're not aware of how we're changing or how change is coming and there is a moment of breath before
Love that.
that change happens, right? Or that revelation or revealing happens, right? And so I love
Yeah. Yeah, the liminal, the liminal spaces, the time when it's not day anymore, but it's not dark yet, or it's
that.
not night anymore, but it's not morning yet, or those times that are in between. I agree with you that there's just a richness there.
And then it also requires you to slow down
Yes,
to appreciate that, right? And I feel like part of what you're saying, like we're not slowing down to really take a breath, to really just pay attention.
that's true. And even when you were saying like there's there's taking a breath, there's also like when you take a breath, there's also that pause, the
Ah,
inhale and the exhale, and even that space can be
yeah,
interesting,
yeah,
and that requires like us to really slow our breath and to really
right.
pay attention. And I think too, it means stepping outside of our routines. And
Hmm.
like, because we're all, I feel like the dominant culture wants us to stay overwhelmed, barely making ends meet, have lots of incoming, with the screen so that we aren't um, revolting against this awful, bullshit in the world,
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
that's this administration or others. The culture for a long time has wanted to suppress that, the imagination in us, and for me, it's that separation from the natural world that
Mm,
causes so much damage. And because people aren't getting out and being with the trees and walking on the land and being with the rivers, and because we know when we do that we get that space and we get
yeah,
that
yeah,
slowness and we get the time to reset, and we if we're lucky and spend more than a little bit of time, even a few hours, we start
yeah,
to get
yeah.
into the slower rhythm of earth herself,
Yeah.
right?
And science also shows that there is some sort of healing property by being in nature, right?
Yes.
Even if it's just sort of walking through the park but there's something that's happening um, underneath the subconscious or sort of underneath the
Mm-hmm.
surface as you're moving in nature itself. And because, we're part of nature.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it called secret kinesis.
Mm,
Everything in nature has its own secret kinesis. Stephen Buhner, I believe, coined that term. It's this vibe, right? The vibe of and not like the vibes, dude, but like what's that energy of like this? We all know it when we're walking in nature and we feel like a disturbance, like
yeah.
ooh, something doesn't feel right in this spot. And then over here we feel like all
Yeah.
allured, and it's something really beautiful. And so when we allow ourselves to tune into the energetics, right, of the natural world, we can begin to see how we're in a conversation, how that affects us, but it
Yeah.
starts slowing down.
Yeah. 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 So for folks who don't know, what does it mean to be a soul guide?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, as you know, Eshin, I have been a long time shamanic practitioner of core shamanism, not culture specific shamanism, and started that when I was 25, and now I'm in my late 50s. And that practice was all nature based, spiritual authority, journeying, using our consciousness to expand in these ways to help others. And so I've always been kind of in that space of being a spiritual, like my first teacher, Michael Harner, the shamanic teacher, used to say, that the shaman is a social activist on a spiritual level.
Uh,
So, helping and healing is the main focus of the shamanic work. And when I was turning 50, I had been doing that all these years, and I was split up from my first husband several years before that. Had my young middle teens kids, and I was doing pretty good. Still teaching English, college English, and also running Spirit Hollow, which not only was doing shamanic programs but women's programs, camps for kids, yoga. So I had a long practice of really tuning into nature as my main guide. And then at 50, I had this knock on the door. You know how you get those knocks on the door, those
yeah,
inner doors,
yeah,
like something else is knocking.
yeah, yeah,
And I think for a lot of women moving into their 50s or moving into perimenopause, menopause, there is a shifting. Literally our bodies are shifting hormonally and all the things. And then there's also kind of just a shifting toward away from maybe for some of us, the real active mothering years toward what will I do next?
yeah.
So I'm in that window, and so I wanted to do a vision quest to get clarity. And so I had done vision quests, two on this land and one on another piece of land, but I'd usually done them pretty much self-designed with one or two people just kind of like supporting. And they were both profound, but I felt like that would be the kind of experience. Talk about slowing down and being alone in nature. I thought
Mm.
this is an experience that would help me to just kind of like listen to what's coming and what do I need. And so I knew of two organizations that both put people in vision quests that are well known in that field. One called the School of Lost Borders and one called Animas Valley Institute. And so I looked at both of those websites, and as an English teacher looking for one to fit in a certain time frame between semesters, and neither one of them had that. But what they did have on the Animas Valley Institute website was this year-long soulcraft program. And I had known about Bill Plotkin's work, who is now my main teacher. If I'd known about his work for a long time because he wrote a book called Soulcraft that I had read and that my ex-husband and I used to um, ask people to read before they would come here on vision quests. And so I knew of his work, but when I saw this, how certain times in your life, it's like a book falls off the shelf or some person just walks into your life, or you have an encounter with something in nature and your life shifts. And this was one of those shifts where the year-long Soulcraft intensive just like rah, rah, and every part of me was like every word that was described was like a yes. And so I embarked on that program, which was over a year, meeting at 4 different locations, a couple months apart, in beautiful landscapes out in the American West. So, canyons and deserts and stunning landscapes, which are altering in their own right. And as part of this program, the third session is a vision fast. And then the other sessions are in preparation or integration of that. And so when I joined that year long, which was kind of a wild card because like a ton of people applied and I hadn't had any previous experience, but I got in the 12 of us with Bill Plotkin himself, this kind of well-known author who started the Animas Valley Institute. And what hooked me into that work was the quality of the guiding, the
Mm.
quality of the mirroring. And so this work, if you were to put it in a kind of Bill Plotkin calls himself a psychologist gone wild. And he was trained as a research psychologist. He actually worked at University of Albany in his
Oh.
20s, and then had one of those like openings of his own where he was kind of went out west and began to do vision fast guiding and this kind of work, and then put together his own body of work, and now has these 4 books and this big organization that I'm part of. And the quality of the guiding was so like I'd never been mirrored in the way that these guides mirror. I never felt so held and seen and caught, but not on a like personality level, but on that like underneath level, like what's here in the soul stream level.
Mm,
And
mm,
so that kind of captured me. And I began to then train with Animus after I finished that year-long program, where I had a profound experience on my third session at the Vision Fast, which is a whole story. That'd be like a whole hour-long session just about how I learned that I was a key turner. So,
mm,
and that was revealed in the Utah canyons. And ever since then, so we call that like being so Bill's definition of soul, just to answer your question about soul guide, is soul being our unique place, our unique niche in earth. He says spirit, which is half of our spirituality, is up and soul is down. And so it's this kind of descent. I was talking about how we're in a kind of a long descent as a culture, but a personal descent. And Jung went on his descent too, Carl Jung.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
powerful descent where
yeah.
he had no guides.
The shadow work, right? Like
Yeah, that's part of this work too. Yeah, he
yeah,
was abducted basically into the underworld, holding onto his desk, shaking. And so we at Animus have all these tools to help guide the journey of soul, guide that journey of descent, so that we can get out of all the distractions and all of the things that bind us. And it's so much nature based,
yeah, yeah.
almost everything is like spending time in nature, immersions in nature, so that you can really go on that kind of a journey. And so I've been training with them for 8 years, and I'm about to graduate from this program this May, right around the time of my second Saturn return. So
Oh,
it's all kind of like, so soul guiding is really helping people into this terrain,
yeah,
crossing out of the outworn world that they may be part of, and crossing into the depths, into
yeah,
hearing what is earth really want of you. And we call it our mythopoetic
yeah,
identity.
yeah.
So that's a really brief version of that. But now that's the main work that I'm doing at Spirit Hollow, a lot with women, but also with young adults and co-ed groups too, or all gendered groups. But I also do a lot of one-on-one mentoring on Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah, so for the folks who don't know, you're in Vermont. You're sort of tucked in the sort of the Teutonic mountains.
Iconics, yeah.
Things.
It's a hard
Um,
one. I know.
it's a the
I
R,
twist.
right? The twisted.
Iconic, yeah.
Tectonic. So I've done your Seeing with the Heart retreat workshop, and it was the first time that I remembered on a spiritual level being introduced to sort of ancestor.
Yes.
And we did some journeys, and I believe that first journey that I did was to sort of the underworld. And let me know if I'm using the right
Yeah, we call it the lower world in the shamanic framework. Yeah.
the lower world, and bumping or just being introduced to my spirit guide, who then walked me over to some ancestors, which was sort of like, what is happening here? And just remember just the rhythm of the drum, sort
Yeah.
of just basically writing it or floating on it or just I don't know, just energetically it's sort of like
Hmm.
pushing me, or not pushing is not the right word, but just
Yeah, I get you.
yeah, yeah. And so like I feel like that's powerful work for
Yeah.
to help somebody to sort of be not only present in nature,
Hmm.
but tap into this other form or other way of seeing and feeling and being in the world, and acknowledging that to a certain degree there is magic, right? Like
Absolutely.
how do
Yeah.
we acknowledge the magic that's happening around us on a daily basis, that we sort of, because we have to rush to our job, or we gotta do all of these adulting things,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah,
and it provides you with that space.
absolutely. And the drumming is something that, what I'm doing now, it looks pretty shamanic. It's very close. And but it's kind of like the line between them is that we do a lot with the individual psyche, and in the shamanic work a lot of it is to journey to help other people, which are both beautiful, and I use both tools. But the drum is one of those things that's universal across the world, right? Any culture is going to be using drums to alter our consciousness. And you said like riding on the drum. That's what the early shamans, the Siberian shamans, used to call the drum their horse, because they would ride their
Mm.
horse into the other realities. And and then of course, now that we can hook people up to EEGs and monitor their brain waves, we see that the monotonous shamanic drum beat literally takes us out of the beta state and puts us in the alpha state within a few minutes.
Yeah.
And so it's physiological too. It's not even just like energetic. It
Yeah.
really does change our brain state. And
Yeah.
so anything we can do to get into that kind of altered state of consciousness will help us to quiet that strategic mind, which is constant, and to open up the imaginal. And, to me, like we all need to be imagining now more
Yeah.
than ever. Like
Yeah.
we have powerful imaginations, right? And
Yeah.
the magic that you're talking about, it does exist. And we also have the ability to imagine what's emerging.
Yeah.
The window of knowing that is our imagination helps us to listen to the dream time, helps us to listen to the trees, helps us to access our deep inner knowings. And we need this. We need to be imaginarians now more than anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those journeys that I think really affected the way that I practice my meditation, the way that I engage intentionally in being in nature. So it's really shifted my way
Mm.
of sort of like this awareness. I may not always know, but there's always like, oh, there's more around here going on,
Yeah.
and offline, and to your comfort level, we're sort of talking about in between, right?
Yeah.
And sort of like it makes me aware that there is this unseen feeling,
Mm.
unseen because our body when it's in stress, when it's in calmness, it's aware of the environment that we're in. And if we're not slowing down enough to pay attention to that, we're sort of doing
Mm.
ourselves a disservice.
Yeah, I'm really curious too, just to scoop back into what you were saying about the ancestors that were there for you. I'm curious about them, because it feels like one of the things that I love to work with too in this kind of like shifting of consciousness and this pivotal time we're in, the eye of the needle that we're in as a species, is to think about deep time.
Mm,
The time that is stretched out way into the past and way out into the future, that
mm,
deep time place where we can access the ancestors and
mm,
we can be in contact with the future ones. And
mm.
when I get into this like really like place, I open my owl wings and I touch 62 million years ago when owls first appeared, and I touch out to some unknown place in the future and I listen, and
Mm,
my whole body comes into alignment. And I
mm.
realize people have been through a lot to get my DNA here.
Yeah, yeah,
So many people have lived and walked and suffered and prayed.
yeah,
And so I'm curious, and we're ancestors in the making, right? So
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
curious about your like, what did you learn, or how did you feel like you're in touch or were in that moment with ancestors?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I've always struggled with was my queerness,
Yeah.
sort of feeling comfortable in my own skin, growing up in a family that was very religious, Christian, very Protestant um, uh, expectations or
Yeah.
um, and so I never felt um, that I was right. And I
Mm.
remember when my spirit guide sort of took me to this particular ancestor, um, they said that you are okay, that you come from a long line of priestesses, shamans, root healers, and most of them were outcast, and some of them were killed for what they practiced or what they brought to the world. And and just thinking about it now, it gives me goosebumps.
Me too.
Uh, to sort of think about folks who were before me, the struggles
Yes.
and the magic in the blood that sort of permeated to where I'm at, um, really sort of gave me hope in the idea that one, I'm not alone. The particular journey that I'm on is unique to me, but the story is not necessarily different. And love doesn't always come in the way that I expect it.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, I can feel that. And it's still with you,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah. No, it's one of those things where I stepped away from the Christian church and really
Yeah.
sort of dedicated a portion of my life into ancestor worship, into being more connected to the earth and making more intentional offerings and remembrances and space for those who were before me. And it also provides me the opportunity to talk to my own parents
Mm,
about their parents and their great grandparents. And so it's it, it sort of changes it sort of changes the dynamic of how I interacted. Because before I moved out of my folks' house home, we didn't necessarily have a good relationship. It wasn't bad,
mm,
but moving out and intentionally wanting to know. And I've had also dreams of various ancestors coming to me and
oh,
saying
yeah.
and like giving me little bits of information about, like, oh, pay attention to this, or you might
Mm,
want to sort of step back from that.
mm.
And I've shared this with my mom, and it, it's changed our relationship.
For the
Uh,
better.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah,
Well, see how the ancestors are working on you through you to do healing even now. You know that I always believe as a healer, and you probably have seen this in your practice over and over, when we in the present stand up and say no to the lineage of pain or the wounding that comes down
yeah,
through the family line, when we take that on and we begin to metabolize it in our own selves, it actually has these ripple effects, right? It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
healing the family line in both
yeah,
directions. And so
yeah,
it's when we, any kind of healing work that we take on, if we really are courageous enough to take on our own healing, it ripples. And then your ancestors speaking to you, and then you're being able to share with your mom, and it's healed your relationship to some degree is beautiful.
yeah. Yeah, it's definitely shifted our relationship, and my mom is like hardcore Protestant, and there's some things that she's able to sort of hear, and then there's other things I think due to sort of the her religious
Hmm.
background, it's difficult
Yeah.
to sort of reconcile Christianity and ancestor worship, right? They sort of
Mm-hmm.
um don't necessarily fit for her. But she's
Hmm.
she's open to those conversations about the dreams that I have.
Yeah,
So
sometimes people can hear mystical information if you say, I had a dream. There's something about, like, we all know that dreams are, what are dreams, right?
yeah,
Beautiful. Sometimes they're prophetic, sometimes they're visitations, other times they're opportunities from mystery or spirit to really dive deeper into our own process, our own unfolding. They're invitations from the dark place, and they're like, what are they? They're magical, right? But I feel like sometimes people, like if you said I did a shamanic journey, and so and I got this information, you tried to tell somebody like your mom that, they'd be like, no. But if you say
no,
I dream and this ancestor came to me, they can be like, oh, cool. Is there something about that, because we
they're
all
really
dream. We all
they're
dream.
they're really I remember sharing with my I'm embarrassed to say this. I remember sharing with my mom one time that I was taking your workshop. Again, this was like years ago. And, and she's like, are you sure they're not worshiping the devil? Because I want you to be mindful because the devil works in very sort of like sneaky, manipulative ways. I'm like, no, mom, it's not that. And so that's sort of like that that sort of Christian
I hear
um,
that.
uh, mindset. I never. I'm surprised that I shared that with you because I've never wanted to share
Okay.
that. Um. So, Tracy, within that sort of what we've talked about, like, what do you think about mental health, spiritual practice, and self-care, and how does that look for you, or how does that come up in your practice, or how do you sort of balance that? Because I sort of feel like they're all one and the same, but
Totally.
very sort of spec- specific specific.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have a lot I could say about that. I'll try to be concise. In the work that I have been doing for the last 8 years with the Animus Institute, we have a whole, there's a book called Wild Mind, which I would recommend people read if they're interested in how does the psyche and healing work overlay with nature. And so it's kind of he calls it a field guide to the human psyche. And so that practice is based in the four directions wheel, the north, south, east, and west, and the center. And so we call it nature's template because anybody around the world can recognize the four directions. Anybody in nature can recognize the times, 4 times of day, the 4 seasons, even the 4 times of life. So it's really like a template that we all, oh, yeah, I get that. And so there's a whole kind of practice around what we call wholing with a W, wholing, coming into wholeness. And there's 4 facets of wholeness that are based in the 4 directions. And then there's inner protectors in the inner part of the wheel, which you would recognize if you've ever done any um, internal family systems kind of work,
Yep,
where we have those inner pieces.
yep.
And the thing I love about this work is we never start with those inner protectors or subpersonalities. Those come after we have come into wholeness.
Yeah.
So we come into wholeness by accessing a nurturing, generative adult in the north and through lots of practices in nature or writing love letters to ourselves or reparenting really is what this is about. Like we never had, none of us had perfect nests, but if we can get the north on board, we can be really in our healer, in our holder, the one who loves us without any conditions. And so we have the north, and in the east we have the innocent sage or the sacred fool. That's the childlike wonder, the new day, presence, mindfulness, the ability to laugh at ourselves when things
Mm,
really, really serious, right? And
mm,
so there's an archetype there in the East. We'd work with the East to bring in that quality, those qualities of the East, in as a facet of our wholeness. In the South, we have our wild one, and so we would be in our body in the South, like, so a lot of spiritualities are head up.
yeah.
And this is where we get into our somatics. And so in here we're animals, we're wild men, we're wild women, we're wild beings, we're creatures. We have all the emotions welcome. For everything from rage to like ecstasy can exist here in the South. And it's also like our sensual, like we are creatures of the earth.
Mm,
When we bring the wild one in, then that facet of
mm,
wholeness helps us to be in our bodies on earth with all of our emotions. And then we move into the West. And in the West, just like the setting sun and the going into the nighttime, in the West, evening time, whatever, we have the what we call the dark muse beloved. And that's where you would find your inner beloved, where you would
ooh,
find inspiration, dream time, metaphor, poetry, music, that feeling of longing that we all have for something more.
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
kind of how we can go into that deeper journey. And so we work with getting these facets of wholeness on board first, and then we begin to work with our wounded parts. And what's really beautiful about it is anybody can access their wholeness. And so we work with wholeness first, and then we start to work with our wounded children. And that's a whole nother, talk about what wounded parts are in which directions, but it includes shadow work. It includes working with our escapist. It includes bringing home and loving our wounded children, never cutting any part of ourselves out, but
Yeah.
escaping and bringing home. And in the North, we also have like our loyal soldiers that have been protecting us. So there's a whole practice, a whole bunch of practices of how to work with bringing home our wholeness and doing it, largely for ourselves, like learning how to do that inner healing for ourselves so that we aren't hijacked by one of our protective parts,
Yeah.
which will take us out because it's dangerous or scary. Well, when we come into our wholeness, then we can be like, okay, now I hear you, and now I can work with you, and now I can hear what you need. And so there's lots of practices we use,
Yeah.
both nature-based, voice dialogues, writing, all kinds of practices to help us to come into that wholeness. So
Yeah.
for me, if I was going to guide somebody on that journey of descent, like I was describing,
Mhm.
the first part of that would be how whole are they? Let's
Mm.
resource somebody in their wholeness so that they can make such a harrowing journey into the depths of the understory. And so there's a whole practices, lots of practices about coming home to wholeness.
Yeah.
And so that's a little bit of that.
Uh, okay. Um, yeah, so I'm I'm curious, like, what programs do you have going on right now?
Hmm. Yeah. So right now most of the programs so right now one of the new programs I have is called Root and Bone. It's a 9-month program for perimenopausal through menopausal women, which is super potent because it's about kind of all the ways in which we are reclaiming our power as wise women. Because we have lost that thread largely in this culture, right? And we're seeing aging women are seen as on the downslide, diminishing. You're losing your looks, you're losing your youth. And so you're kind of, we're kind of shoved aside in a lot of ways. And so, and if we were in a healthy culture, an intact culture, which we aren't, we would have initiated adults who'd gone through some stuff, and then we would have those initiated adults not only helping the young ones to make their rites of passage, we would also be gaining and gathering our resources and our power as we aged, right?
Yeah.
Instead, in this culture, we're shoving people aside, and and it's not like the fault of individual families as much it is of a system, right?
Right.
Where people can't stay home, they can't take care of their elders, so they have to put them in facilities which don't really care about, it's like a loop. Whereas if we were in an intact culture, a village or tribe, the elders are like, they're the bomb, right? They're the ones who make the decisions. They're the council holders. They're the ones who give the advice. And, you know, so there's this beautiful process that we are unfolding, this, my co-facilitator Tish and I, where we are weaving in these kind of animist practices, shamanic practices. She comes from a tracking school, like out on the land kind of tracking, and a long line of women's work. And so this group meets once a month for a week, a whole weekend, every month for 9 months, and really like just reclaiming power, looking at their wounds, coming together in community, which is just, we're all starved for like circles and community and to
Yeah.
have, our people. So that program is ongoing. It's going really, really well. And we'll be starting another iteration of that in the fall. And then, so I have some other weekend programs for women. And then I have a training for anybody who might be listening who is a holder of space, any different spaces in the practices of counsel, the circle practices, which there's many, many ins and outs of that. And we call it the craft of counsel as ceremony. And so that's a 4-day training for, would-be facilitators, current facilitators or guides or group holders. And that's really fun. It's really practical tools, but lots of time in nature too. How to do this kind of counsel, how to conduct these kinds of ceremonies. And that's coming up, I think, at the end of March. And then I have some summer programs coming up as well. I have a women's vision fast. And then I sponsor the Animas Valley Institute to come here. So they'll be doing a Soulcraft program, which is kind of the entry program to some of the work I was talking about. And I think that's the last week in May. So, I would encourage anybody who's interested just to check out our website, which is spirithollow.org, to see the most current things that are going on.
Um, Earth Gap Year program. Is that?
Yeah, so this was like this is a whole nother thing, Earthcraft. So for several years, I've been running camps here for like 20 years for kids and teens. And just seeing, and you might know it being a mental health professional of that 18 to 25-year-old group. I mean, the statistics from the latest census are 50% reporting pervasive depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. 50% of we're losing our young adults, and I think part of it is because we're in such a pathologically sick culture and there's no support. And so I started a program a couple of years ago, a summer program called Earthcraft, which brought young people in that age group here for about 9 days to do all these amazing practices like counsel, like Wanders on the Land, like a vision fast for 24 hours, like the wild mind practices I was describing, and powerful, beautiful, incredible work. And so some other guides and I were like, well, we really need to just do this for like a chunk of time. So we created a gap semester program, which would have been 8 weeks, and it was supposed to be in last fall. And we worked it, man. I joined the Gap Year Association. I met with educational consultants. We did all kinds of outreach, and we just didn't get the people. And apparently, it was one of the worst years for GAP programs all around the world in terms of enrollment. We even had scholarship money that somebody pledged, and we couldn't give it away. And so it's kind of a sadness for me because I know that when we get that cohort here with seasoned guides who are really listening and holding them and really encouraging, it's profound. We just can't we couldn't get it to the right people. So we've kind of took a step back from that. And so this June, we are doing a 2 week residency called Earthcraft Residency, but we're opening it up to all the different ages. So anybody who's interested in coming to learn some of the tools I've already talked about, but also we're going to be doing some permaculture projects. We're going to be tracking on the land with the underlying idea that we are being the imaginarians who are visioning the way to have healthy communities.
Mhm.
And so people will be learning tools to take out into their own communities. So fingers crossed that we'll be able to run that one in it's the second half of June.
Well,
So if you
yeah.
know anybody who has 2 weeks, we do have some scholarship money who's interested in immersing in a community setting for 2 weeks where we really go deep together and also work together doing practical things as well as meals. And we're going to be planting trees, so there's a lot of kind of practical stuff mixed in with the deeper soul work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And there's something about, for me, um, connection to community, right? It's building community. Like
Yes.
I remember when I first came to the States from Haiti as a three-year old, we moved to Brooklyn, and we lived in Brooklyn, and we lived in apartment building, and in an apartment building, I probably had family members um, that like my folks knew, and then my grandmother sort of lived further down the street, and
Yeah.
so like I had relatives that were less than an hour away from me. And the idea of losing or people who move out of their community or for whatever reason for, like they want to, be be adults, something is lost, right?
That's
So something is lost from learning from your elders. Something is lost
absolutely.
from connecting with uncles and nephews. Even though, like technology makes communication slightly easier, but it's really not easier.
It's
Um,
disembodied. It's not tangible. It's not day to day on the ground, helping
uh,
each other, building together, sharing meals together. Yeah, it's one of my greatest laments is that we don't have the tribe or the village anymore.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I truly believe to a certain degree, individuals who struggle with depression, individuals who struggle with anxiety are disconnected. Not just from family, because sometimes, your family of
Yeah,
origin is just toxic and it's just good just to
right,
to
right.
to be in chosen family.
Yes.
But But I do believe loneliness is contributing to a lot of emotional, mental unwellness that we're sort of seeing that's on the rise
Totally.
to a certain degree.
I totally agree with you. And COVID didn't help that, that isolation and that disconnection, that loneliness.
Yeah. Yeah, COVID, I think, was for me one of those like, wow, things could really shift really quickly, really fast. And the resources and family and support that I have, for the most part, are like 3 to 4 hours away. And the folks that I do have local, right, they don't necessarily have the means to support me. Like they'll listen to me, which is great. Um, and that's a level of support just by listening to somebody. But there is something missing about not being in a tribe or a community.
Sure, for sure. And that's my deepest prayer is that we can make it, fake it till we make it, that my dog is scratching in the background. That's what that is, if you can hear that noise.
Aw, it's like I
That
want to be part of the conversation.
he's getting hungry.
Aw.
But I often think like we have to lay the bricks in the bridge from this world to the next world.
Right.
And we may not even be here to see the results of it. But for me, it's like, I feel like, what can I do to plant seeds in everything I do so
Yeah.
that the future ones can eat?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so sort of just winding down, I'm curious about like how would you sort of start a conversation or mentor somebody if they're interested in this path? Like what do you think would have been helpful on your journey in starting, your business, Spirit Hollow, from grant writing to, buying the land to just personal practice. I'm curious, like how would you sort of mentor or support somebody in this particular spiritual journey that they decide to go on?
Yeah, I would be saying trust the impulses, trust the like where you get the for me it's like I kind of just get like a download, right? Like, oh, you should go, you should go down this road and check out this piece of land. Like, listen to the inner voices. I feel like we all have that intuition. And maybe it's guides, maybe it's our higher self, maybe it's our deep psyche, maybe it's who knows what that is. But I think we've all had access. We've all had those experiences where we get that voice, not the voice of like, you suck, the inner critic, but the voice of like, this is the thing. And so I feel like we all have that. And if we can carve out time to open to that and to listen, like for me, every step of the way, it's been a feeling or that kind of that guidance voice, which has said, like even when we first came to this land and it was trashed with 80 tons of garbage, 40 tons, sorry, I just exaggerated it by half. Still, 40 tons of garbage is quite
I,
a
I'm,
bit.
I'm I'm sure it felt like
And
more
it
more
did.
than that.
Yeah, when we first came here and we walked on the land, the name just dropped into my mind, Spirit Hollow, because this place is a hollow and it's filled with spirit. And so
Yeah.
it's like just those little sparks that we could ignore,
Yeah.
if they feel aligned with us, not like if it feels bad or if we feel off with it, but really listening to intuition and that deep inner knowing. I feel like that's the biggest guidance. And if you can find mentors, people who've walked the path before you, who are actual humans who will encourage you or challenge you, that's even better, right? If you have people that you can rely on to see you and, like I said, mirror you, and to
Yeah.
like really pull out the parts of your journey that are really intriguing and really alluring.
Mhm.
And that's where finding community and finding others, but the deepest connection is to ourself and to the earth, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, how do you particularly practice self-care?
Yeah. Well, my favorite thing is to get up early. I mean, it's just my biorhythm. My husband stays up early. He's a filmmaker and he stays up really late working on films. He's just a night owl. So sometimes he won't come to bed till like 2, and I've been in bed since 10. And so we like meet in the middle, and then he sleeps in, but I'm up, and now that I'm not driving kids everywhere, I can't really sleep in that long anyway. They ruined me forever from that. But I love to just be with my coffee by the fire with my animals in the morning and just enjoy this, just like watching the world come awake.
Yeah.
One thing. The other thing that I do every day is I get out on the land. And that's like super self-care for me because I feel like I can just, like I could have been watching too much news in the last couple of days of all the crap that's happening. And I'm just like, but if I go outside and I go just right down to the brook, or I sit with one of my favorite trees, or even if I'm just walking with my dogs, I feel that shifting happening, which is just Earth is still going along at this other rhythm. The human world is all like, and the Earth is like, I mean, yes, we're affecting the ecosystems. That's a whole conversation. But if we look at the rhythm of the Earth and the quietness and the way the birds are interacting and the water is flowing, like that's to me deep self-care.
Yeah.
I also practice yoga and do exercising, and try to eat really clean and really good food.
Nice.
And in the summer, I spend a lot of times gardening, a lot of time gardening. Yeah.
Aw. Well, I'm gonna have all your information if folks want to sort of learn more about the programs and workshops and things you offer
So much.
down below. But this was a pleasure, Tracy.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you.
You too. It was
Yeah.
really good to reconnect,
Connect.
and
Yeah.
I
I know you're
appreciate.
just right up the road. Yeah.
You're right.
Next time we should connect in person.
Yes. We won't be like some friends we know and just be hermits. We
Yes.
won't do
Yes.
that.
I'm kind of, as I get older, I'm like more of a hermit than I used to be too, but I don't mind it at all.
I
Yeah.
see.
Okay. Thank
I will
you so much. All right.
definitely
Take care.
see ya.